An airstrike by the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen has hit a detention center, killing at least 100 prisoners, according to officials for the Houthi rebel group. Locals said the building was being used to detain people opposed to the Houthis. The head of the International Red Cross in Yemen toured the site and suggested the death toll could rise. Frank Balkenstein said the center had held around 170 people and only 40 had survived. The Saudi-led coalition said it had attacked a military target. The devastating war in Yemen has been raging since 2015, and it's far from over. Our correspondent, Fani Fachar, was just there and joins us now. Fani, good to see you. Not many journalists managed to make it into Yemen. What can you tell us about what's happening there?
Right, it's very, very difficult to receive access to this country. It took me personally almost 1 year to get inside the country. And when I was there, I experienced a very fluid situation when it comes to the question, who is actually in charge of the interim government place, which is in Aden, in the south of the country. You have to imagine when you go through Aden and around Aden, you have to pass through different checkpoints. And the most repeated sentence that I've heard by Yemenis was, when we wake up in the morning, we really don't know who is in charge. Is it the separatists who are dreaming of an own state? Basically, they want to return to a situation the way it was up until 1990, when Yemen was basically two countries, the north and the south. Is it controlled by the Emiratis, part of the Saudi-led coalition? Is it controlled by whatever is left of the government? And then, of course, we cannot forget that there are also jihadis that are active in Aden and in the south. So within that very complex and unstable situation, it is where I met Fatima Al-Marouk within a hospital, a very young doctor who said she had a completely different vision and expectation when it comes to the job of being a doctor before she started her medical studies, before the war started. This is her story. Let's have a look.
Things can change in seconds at this intensive care unit in Aden. This is Janat. She's 18 months old and has been diagnosed with malaria and malnutrition. She's hovering between life and death.
Did you request oxygen? There is nothing. The oxygen bottle in the room doesn't work.
The doctor, Fatima, must improvise. It's not the first time she has felt helpless. Steam inhalation is the only option available for Janat at the moment.
She's now barely taking breath. See, her, breathing is so fast, so she needs oxygen right away.
Fatima's shift is just beginning. The oxygen bottle is delivered after all. Janat will make it. Many children do not. For Fatima, the fact that oxygen cannot always be provided on time is depressing. When she began her medical studies before the war, shortages were unheard of.
I was feeling optimistic. I was really looking forward to graduate, but it's just so difficult to afford living, even for doctors that considered, the higher jobs here in the country.
Happiness comes in small doses here. This father is relieved his daughter is gaining some weight for now. There are not enough doctors, and most of those here must work unpaid. Hospitals cannot cope. It's not just a lack of food in Yemen that brings a lot of people, especially malnourished children, to this hospital. Once they arrive, they face another problem, lack of medical supplies, and there's not enough space. Simply, there aren't enough beds for all these children. These children are new patients waiting in the hallway for admission.
Yeah.
Fatima was not prepared for this level of stress. After a 24-hour shift, she finally finds sanctuary at home. Photography helps her to unwind. At the age of 26, she finds her job overwhelming.
It makes me feel that I am not still working and just forget it all and living it all in the hospital and start a new day, new life maybe.
She wants to continue her medical studies in Germany. Her father, a geologist, used to live there in the 1980s.
Papa, do you think the war in Yemen will end?
Inshallah, but it will require a lot of time.
How long?
Nobody knows, but we hope the war ends for our children because the people are suffering and they are in bad shape. There's no stability, nothing. No salary, no jobs. The youth is lost now.
With the future so bleak, Fatima doesn't know how long she will stay in Yemen working unpaid. She wants to continue working as a doctor to help people, but she also wants better opportunities of her own, if possible, outside of Yemen.
So it's very difficult just to get access to medical care in Yemen. Tell us more about the humanitarian situation in the country. How bad is it?
The situation is dire, not only in Aden, in many parts of Yemen, especially in the north, which is controlled by the Houthi rebels, the people that basically the Yemeni government is fighting since 2014 and with the Saudi-led coalition since 2015. But what's also a problem here is not just having access to food, but whether who's controlling that food. In fact, the World Food Programme said that they are temporarily suspending distribution of aid in the north because they claim that the Houthis have been stealing that food and distributing it among their fighters. But even if you get close to a distribution site, there's still the question, do you have enough fuel to go to that site and gather that food for your family? So there are a lot of situations and challenges that make that add an extra level of hardship to the situation on the ground. Now, what comes as a result of an ongoing war for almost 5 years now, it's in the 5th year that the Yemen war is developing, it has become so complex. A lot of people don't even understand who is fighting here against whom anymore. And the people on the ground, the only thing that they feel, and they also shared with me, they just feel abandoned. They don't feel just abandoned by their government. They don't just feel abandoned by a lack of system, mismanagement within the country and corruption, but also a lack of international help and aid and constant attention to the actual conflict going on for so many years now on the ground.
Let's talk about the international dimension to some degree. There is a civil war going on in Yemen, but it's also a proxy war to some degree with Iran on the one side and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates on the other. Is there any prospect of this coming to an end anytime soon?
At this point, no, to bluntly spoken, because it's not just the proxy war that you just laid out, the Houthis apparently supported by Iran and between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or it's not just the civil war between the Yemeni government supported by the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthis, but there's a civil war within the civil war developing. Shortly after I left Aden, there were attacks in Aden itself. The separatists, dreaming of their own state, are trying to fill a void that seems to be left behind by the United Arab Emirates, who are withdrawing their forces, they say, in order to help the peace process. But at the same time, what's happening on the ground, there are new front lines opening up. So just from me talking right now, you realize that it's very, very complex. So talking about the peace process at this point, yes, a lot of talks can be made, but unfortunately, on the ground, there's no action, no vivid action in terms of whether peace will actually come about anytime soon.
Fanny, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. DW International correspondent Fanny Facha.